There's a variety of different hand tools we'll get to before we get to the machines. The flappers are probably like the most well-known grass tool you come across. Essentially, a flapper is intended to do just smothering, just like this, just like you're sweeping. That's all you're really doing to any kind of a small flaming fire. You can do the same thing with your boot, which is why we go with all leather boots. Flappers, like again, are designed to smother just like this. For the most part, we don't even keep these around anymore because we have water or boots or a pump can. But they do have their limitations. You know, you can't go in and expect to put out a whole bunch of really high flames with something like this. What you don't want to do is take a flapper and swat like that, because essentially the air that's coming down from the flapper pushes your flames out, and it actually takes a small problem and makes it worse. So it's really handy to want to go and do the karate chop over your shoulders, but that's not what you really want to do. It's just strictly a smothering tool. We go with all leather boots. Generally, you want boots that have a sewn-on stitching, because if you have that rubber stuff that's just glued, if you do a lot of fire and you use your feet a lot, essentially that glue softens up through the course of the day, and you could ultimately end up with like kind of like an alligator toe, right? You get the sole separated from your shoe, and then you get the big floppiness like this, and you get a bunch of junk in your shoes that can be tough on your feet. So your boots are a really big, important part of your arsenal for dealing with, especially the backing fire. And this time of year, it's not super high fire activity, so you could do a lot with your boot and not even have to use water. The thing we keep around a lot are these, they're called the fire rake, which are different than what you'd see at like your farm stores. They have a much stiffer and stouter kind of tines on their rakes, and you can get them with different numbers of tines, whatever. But they're really good for raking fuel away, or if you have hot spots, say after the fact. You know, a lot of times you burn, if there's a lot of fuel, there's a lot of duff, and that heat will just stay in the compacted duff, and it'll sit there and smoke and smolder for quite a while. You can go through with your fire rake and just rake it up and release that heat, and it'll just dissipate almost immediately. And then you don't have to use water, and you feel pretty good about walking away from it. The other thing that's really important on the fire rakes is, say, when you're working in pastures or areas that have had livestock in the past, when we have our fire breaks, there's, say, like the gravel road or the gravel trail there, the road, whatever. We usually would say, like, say the first 50 feet from the edge of the gravel in your unit, you'd have no smokes. So if you have cows, that just means you're gonna have cow turds. You could take your fire rake and use it like a hockey stick and fling your cow turds, you know, on the other side of the 50-foot line, and then you should be able to walk away from it. You can clean up, you know, slops or spot overs in your fire break with them pretty good, because you could just rake it over, break up your heat, step on it, and go, or hit it with a pump can, which I forgot on the trailer, but I'll show you that in a minute. So this is something we carry around, and you can see we've got them on all the equipment here. The other piece here is these, the drip torch, any kind of fuel you have. For me, it doesn't really matter how you color code your stuff when you're at home or who you're working with. What's important is you have it clearly labeled. For us, we always use red gas, blue drip torch, and yellow diesel. It really doesn't, that's just my system and what we've kind of used through the world. But as long as you plaster whatever you have in that can all over it, especially if you're working with other people who you don't know or neighbors or whatever, you're going to protect yourself from somebody putting the wrong fuel in the wrong thing. Because too much diesel fuel in a drip torch isn't good, too much gas in a drip torch isn't good. Drip torch fuel in the drip torch is what you guys are really trying to get at. So the last kind of piece of the puzzle that we use a lot, and I really recommend anybody having, is these pump cans. Two reasons. One, essentially whenever you're working around a fire or whatever, this pretty much gives you 5 gallons of water at any given time. So when you're working on something and the next person, or say your ATV, excuse me, is a half a mile away, you have to get on the radio and say, I need water here, right? That's a half a mile that person's gonna have to come around and bring you the water. And you've got a pump can on your back. You essentially have 5 gallons of water to use at your disposal, and you don't even have to call that person on the ATV because you've got, you know, your small issue under control. Now the downside of a pump can is 5 gallons of water weighs 40 pounds, and not everybody likes to tote around 40 pounds all day. Totally fine, because you can put in 3 gallons of water, right? You don't have to fill the thing to the top. And I actually would recommend you don't fill it to the top because there's breather holes on the top. So if you fill this thing all the way, just from walking around, it sloshes out the top and then you end up with a wet back. So you can put as much as you're willing and comfortable handling, but it's totally worth toting around and having, especially if you're on your own and you don't have a lot of ATV power. The other kind of neat thing with pump cans is on these tips, you've got 2 different nozzles. There's 2 holes in the one, which gives you more of a kind of a fog pattern. And then there's one tip that's just got 1 hole on it. And that's for, say, if you have a stick or a stump or something you just want to use like your garden hose and have the straight stream versus a more of a wider, not so concentrated pattern. So you can kind of pick and choose what you're really going for. The one thing to remember with a pump can is to say there's a little bit of fire here slopping around and you're trying to put it out. You kind of use it just like a broom and go back and forth like this, and then that puts your water out. You just want to do like a sweeping motion, and a lot of times these cans will last a fairly long time. The bigger problem when you have these sorts of cans essentially is leaking, dripping out of the tips of the nozzles here. So as long as you keep the tips above the top of the can, you don't have to worry about it dripping out and getting you all wet all day long. The drip torches, there's lots of different ways of doing ignition when you guys are doing prescribed fire at home or otherwise. There's a lot of different companies that make these drip torches. Some are cheaper, some are more expensive. I would just say you get what you pay for. And the other more important thing is when you get what you pay for, keep track as to the different kinds or manufacturers, because even though they look nearly identical, the different companies' parts aren't always universal. And if a thread pattern is just a little bit different, it makes a big mess when you're trying to dump fuel out. So the biggest mistake, say, I made with my crew years ago, tough learning curve. We took all of our drip torches apart and just kind of made piles of each of the pieces to really go through and clean, and like we soaked them and everything. And then when we got back to putting them all back together, we had this complete disaster of parts not matching up, and then we'd turn stuff over, it'd leak. It was horrible. I got the big dipstick award on that one. But live and learn, right? So when you're working with your neighbors or whatever, I started putting zip ties on the handles. So one, you get your stuff back, because this one isn't quite as good as that one. There's some mixed up parts. So when I let Pete borrow it, I want to make sure I get my stuff back. Working with neighbors, everybody kind of does stuff a little bit different. So lots of different ways. I've seen painted handles, I've seen duct tape, electrical tape, all that kind of stuff. The tape eventually, because you're around, you know, the heat of the fire, it tends to get kind of soft and loosen up. Zip ties seem to hold up fairly well. And since you're wearing leather gloves, you don't have to necessarily worry about getting your fingers tore up too bad by the cut off edges of it. So a drip torch is essentially a mix of gasoline and diesel. Depending on who you're talking to or maybe the time of year, sometimes there's a variety as to how much gas and how much diesel. Usually I do about, in a 5-gallon can, we'll do 3 gallons of diesel and 2 gallons of gas. If you do more gas and diesel, you have a really hot mix, if that makes sense. And it'll end up like shooting fire out the tip, which is a little overkill for what you're going to try to do most of the time. If you have too much diesel, when you dump it out on the ground, it won't hardly stay lit. So there is kind of like a happy medium, and you just have to kind of play around with it and see what you go with. But for me, and when I go, say, to the gas station and get fuel, if I take a 5-gallon can, you know, a 3-2 ratio works out pretty well, and I can keep track of that. There's a couple pieces that are important on a drip torch. So here on the side is an air valve, because essentially it's a closed system. And this air valve is what allows your drip torch to breathe. Let's see if we get, essentially that's what you're going for. You want that fuel just to kind of drip out the tip there. And you can control that rate of flow by your air valve. So if you turn it over and it's shooting 3 feet that way, that's too much. If you tighten up that air valve a little bit, that'll bring that back in, because you want their fuel to just have a steady flow or a drip coming out of the tip and going across your wick here. This wick is essentially what's burning all the time. So depending on how you walk, like I walk a little crooked. So I turn, you know, or if it's, you know, if the wind's blowing or whatever, you can kind of turn this to make sure your fuel is dripping across, you know, what's on fire. Otherwise, you just end up having a bunch of fuel dump on the ground, and you're gonna have to go back and relight it and waste a bunch of time and energy. So the little trick of twisting the nozzle really can help make life a little bit easier for you. And inside, Snyder asked, like, okay, you got me carrying around a metal can full of fuel, like it's pretty much like a walking bomb, right? What makes it not explode? There's little valves inside the pigtail here that don't let the fire or the fuel go back in there. So that's what kind of keeps it from becoming a bomb in your hand. Going back to the comments on the gloves, right? So when you're lighting with a drip torch, right? Fuel's coming out, fire there, and say you want to put out your drip torch, right? You're gonna stand and hang on or whatever. The most natural instinct you have is to go and blow it out with air. But there's a huge red flag with that, right? Because before you can blow it out with air, you're sucking air in. And when you do that and your face is right here, you don't want to suck heat at your face. That's a bad idea. So the best way of putting those torches out is just taking your hand and go over the top and just smother it with your glove, which goes back to having a thicker leather glove, buffalo or cattle or whatever it is, leather, because that's got that thicker palm and it won't burn your hand. The word of caution I'll say with that is, if you do a lot of fire and you do this a lot, your glove ends up getting full of drip torch fuel. And there is a point in time where you do that and your glove will burn. So you just kind of have to heed the warning a little bit as things are progressing, moving along. At the end of the day, you know, when you're done, essentially this collar comes off and you just put it back in your can, and you don't have to worry about the fuel going bad or anything like that. As a matter of fact, when we use these things, I usually fill them up with junk fuel from our equipment and stuff. We got a barrel, because you're just burning it. It's not like it's gonna really go bad. So put it upside down, put it in the tank, cap it, and then you're good till next year. There's no fuel treatment or anything like that.